Good morning again to everyone. I was thinking as I was reading something this past week about all the kids going back to school and all the different things that kids say and do. And I came across this. It says the children's Sunday school department was undertaking a study of the book of Proverbs. To illustrate what Proverbs are, Miss Daisy collected the first phrase of a bunch of traditional ones and asked the children to creatively complete them. Okay? Now, I love kids. I really love kids. So here are some of them. It says, better to be safe than, and they finished it, punch a fifth grader. Strike while the bug is close. Don't bite the hand that looks dirty. The pen is mightier than the pigs. A penny saved is not very much. And the last one I like, children should be seen and not spanked or grounded. I love kids. You know, last week we ended with Paul demanding to stand trial before Caesar. And we know after Paul demanded this that Festus met with the council and agreed that to Caesar you shall go. And I think that why Festus said that so much was because, number one, he would be getting rid of Paul. And I think also he was trying to make the Jewish council happy by getting rid of Paul also. And that would satisfy their need of Paul no longer being in the region. So we're going to be in chapter 25. We're going to be picking up at verse 13. And we're going to see that King Agrippa is now on the scene. It said, after some days, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to greet Festus. And when they had been there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a certain man left, a prisoner by Felix. Now, I really believe if King Herod would have been alarmed if he would have realized that his official visit to Festus in Caesarea to welcome the new government was actually a fulfillment of a prophecy of Jesus of Nazareth. Because you see, the Lord had predicted that his followers would be witnesses before kings in his name. Matthew 10, 17 through 19 says this, but beware of men, for they will deliver you up to councils and scourge you in their synagogues. You will be brought before governors and kings for my sake, as a testimony to them and to the Gentiles. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak. For it will be given to you in that hour that you should speak. Now, if you've been paying any type of attention over these last couple years of Acts, the Apostle Paul has been before the councils. He has been before the synagogues. He has been scourged. Governors and officials he's talked to. And now Luke sets this stage for him to be before a king. Agrippa II ruled a client kingdom of the Roman Empire to the northeast of Festus's province. Agrippa was also an expert in Jewish customs and religious matters. And though he didn't have the jurisdiction over Paul in this case, his hearing of the matter would be helpful to Festus. A little bit about King Agrippa. His great-grandfather had tried to kill Jesus as a baby. His grandfather had John the Baptist beheaded. And his father had martyred the first apostle, James. Bernice was his sister. And secular history records rumors that they had physical relationships with each other. This family tree is all messed up. No doubt about it. There was murderers in it. Maneuvering for power, incest, and moral corruption marked its many branches preceding and during the incarnate and risen ministry of Jesus Christ. So now here we have Paul before the next line of the Herods, Agrippa II. Herod Agrippa II didn't rule over much territory, but he was of great influence because the emperor gave him the right to oversee the affairs of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem and appoint the high priest. Now, Festus, being new to his post and perhaps unfamiliar with Jewish traditions, if you think about last week, he was, and customs, seemed to be somewhat confused by Paul's case. Festus just couldn't wrap his mind around what was happening. And therefore, even though there was not enough evidence to convict Paul, his investigation continued. And I think the case was probably confusing to Festus because of the lack of any type of concrete evidence against him. And that's because Paul has done no wrong, zero wrong. There was enough reason for acquittal in Paul's case. And the appearance before the king was really a hearing, not a trial, because Agrippa didn't have any jurisdiction in this matter. Yet he could have an important influence upon Festus. So Festus starts by saying that there's a certain man left in prison by Felix, and we pick up in verses 15 through 22, and it says this. Now it's the man left in prison, about whom the chief priest and the elders of the Jews informed me when I was in Jerusalem, asking for a judgment against him. Now I want you to really pay attention, if you were here last week, how Festus handled everything. And I want you to pay attention to this part of Scripture, how he's telling what happened to Agrippa and Bernice in private. In 16 it says, "To them I answered, it is not the custom of the Romans to deliver any man to destruction before the accused meets the accusers face to face, and has opportunity to answer for himself concerning the charge against him. Therefore, when they had come together without any delay, the next day I sat on the judgment seat and commanded the man be brought in. When the accusers stood up, they brought no accusations against him of such things as I supposed, but had some questions against him about their own religion, and about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. And because I was uncertain of such questions, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. But when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision of Augustus, I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar. Then Agrippa said to Festus, I would also like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you will hear him." Now, I really wanted y'all to understand this case that's laid out by Paul before the king and his sister in such a way that his own handling of it appeared faultless. Right? I mean, Festus is really trying to make himself look really good here to the king. Think back not too long ago the way that Claudius Lysias glossed over all of his blunders in his smooth letter to Felix. Festus is doing the same thing here. He takes credit for the accusers to accompanying him to Caesarea to meet Paul face to face, and also for this wise counsel that the Romans do not hand over a defendant before he had the opportunity to make a defense. That's not what happened. We all know that from last week. We know that Festus tried to favor the Jews by asking Paul if he wanted to go to Jerusalem to be tried before him there, with the unspoken risk of being turned over to the Jewish court. And it's only after that Paul appealed to Caesar does Festus finally take a firm stand against the Jewish request. Festus was all over the place. He was trying to help the Jews out all he could. He was going back and forth. And it wasn't immediately. Remember, how many days did he stay in Jerusalem before he went back to Caesarea? It was 10 days. All right, it wasn't immediate like he was telling the king. But a few things of interest to be taken from Festus speaking to the king here. I think it's very amusing to think of the religious leaders protesting to Festus that Paul won't stop talking about the risen Jesus and hoping that the governor will make Paul stop. And the words, a certain Jesus, as he says, shows that Festus doesn't know much about Jesus at all. Probably hadn't even heard about him. It's good to remember this also, that the great and the important people of Paul's day didn't know much about Jesus. They had to be told about him. And brothers and sisters, this is why we must keep on teaching about Jesus Christ, because he is still so little known to this world. People truly don't understand Jesus Christ. It's up to us to tell the truth, to spread the gospel. Spurgeon says the masses of this city of Caesarea are as ignorant of Jesus as Festus was. The limited knowledge that Festus did have regarding Paul's preaching shows that in his preaching, Paul emphasized the death and resurrection of Jesus. And by implication, it also shows that Paul emphasized the cross. And it is hard for me to believe, as I'm reading all of this, that Festus knew that Paul preached that Jesus died without also hearing about how Jesus died. He wasn't concerned about that. And then, of course, Agrippa's curiosity meant that Paul would have another opportunity to speak God's truth to another Gentile ruler. And this would be the third such opportunity in Acts 20, chapters 24 through 26, right? He spoke to Festus. He spoke to Felix. And now he'll speak to Agrippa. Verse 23 of Acts 25 says this. So the next day, when Agrippa and Bernice had come with great pomp and had entered the auditorium with the commanders and the prominent men of the city, at Festus's command, Paul was brought in. Wow. This is interesting how Luke describes all of this. The king and his sisters come walking in their royal splendor, dressed in their purple robes. And I imagine Festus probably wore his scarlet governor robe. And this hall of audience, it's so elegant, was further adorned with decorations befitting the king's presence. So we have probably this beautiful hall with probably flowers and everything. The king marches up, followed by the governor. And there's captains that are there, and commanders and centurions and legionnaires were deployed inside and outside of this hall for safety. Didn't want anybody to come in and kill the king. It's an imposing setting in which the apostle was to witness for Christ, without a doubt. But yet, no matter what his circumstances, it's a tremendous opportunity for Paul to share the gospel of Jesus Christ to everyone who is there. So here we have Paul enters, and I believe in chains, dangling around this worn-out body, physically unimposing statue of a man. What a moving study in contrast if you think about it. All of these people, all of this military around this hall. The king's all dressed up, the governor's dressed up, beautiful place. And here comes poor old Paul. In chains, just probably bending down. Nothing strong about him. Verse 24. through 27. And Festus said, King Agrippa and all the men who are present with us, you see this man about whom the whole assembly of the Jews petitioned me, both at Jerusalem and here, crying out that he was not fit to live any longer. Pay attention to what's being said. But when I found that he had committed nothing deserving of death, and that he himself had appealed to Augustus, I decided to send him. I have nothing certain to write to my Lord concerning him. Therefore I have brought him out before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after examination has taken place, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner and not to specify the charges against him. In presenting Paul to the king, Festus enhances the picture of the pressure he is under by the exaggerated statement that he was asked by the whole Jewish community to deal with the prisoner. That was a lie. But you know the problem here is, and a lot of us have this. When the truth isn't all that exciting, we really like to add to it. Or when the truth does not really fit what we think someone might like to hear, we really like to add to it. And this is what Festus is doing. He is trying to make himself look so good that the king just really pats him on the back for a job well done. And that the king will help him send this letter to Caesar. We need to be careful in our lives that we speak just the truth. We don't add to it. We don't take away from it. We speak the truth in love. But not Festus. Oh, Festus is just exaggerating everything. The whole Jewish community. He just so happens to omit his own unwise suggestion that Paul stand trial back in Jerusalem. You see, he didn't want the king to hear that part, so he omitted it. And in verse 25, I like when it says, when I found that he had committed nothing deserving of death. And I think it was very important that Luke record these words of Festus. They clearly state that Festus understood that Paul was innocent, that he could find nothing against him. He wants this vast assemblage to know that he, the governor, quickly determined the prisoner's innocence of any crime and has called the present hearing to have something definite about him to send in writing on to the emperor. Festus just couldn't simply send Paul to Caesar with a letter that said, I really don't know what this man is accused of, and he probably is innocent of any wrongdoing, but I thought I should send him your way anyway. Really? That's not a way to be popular with Caesar if that's what you're trying to do. Paul was so innocent that Festus could not exactly describe or specify the charges against him. That's how innocent Paul was during this time. In closing this morning, you know, Paul saw this new audience as yet another opportunity to present the gospel. And next week, we will see how Paul presents the gospel to the king and his sister and all of the ones around the hall. But as I think about this, I think about, rather than complain about your present situation that you might find yourself in. And we all have a tendency to do that. We all have a tendency to want to complain about the situation that we're in. We need to start looking for ways to use every opportunity that we have to serve God and share Him with others instead of complaining. Because you know what? Your problems may be opportunities in disguise to share Jesus Christ with others around you. Let us pray. Father, thank you so much for this time to be able to share your word with brothers and sisters. Father, Acts is so full of information and different examples of the power of the Spirit in Paul's lives and in the early church and the early leaders. And I pray, Father, as we're coming to a close in this powerful, powerful book, I pray that we start taking the courage that we see that's present in Paul's life, in Stephen's life, James' life. And we start allowing the power of the Spirit to come forward. And just like Paul, at the moment when the words are needed, you will give them. I pray, Father, as at the end of next month when we have our Friend Sunday, that we go out and we actually invite people to come here. The ones who aren't church, dear Lord, to hear the message of Christ and to get to know Him. Be with us as we leave.